Thank you, Acting President. It's disappointing that I am rising to speak on this reactionary and ill-informed motion of Ms Bart's today, which sets a pathway to introduce ag-gag laws by stealth. This Nationals motion is not just about simple trespass, but about systematically silencing those who expose hidden animal cruelty. But I expect nothing less from a party struggling to maintain relevance among their original base. On the other hand, I was elected into the parliament because of the rapidly growing demand to bring legislative change to prevent animal cruelty. And I plan on getting this done in a way that respects and abides by the law. However, this growing appetite for change has come from a place of disgust, sadness and outrage for the way we treat animals. And in many cases, this cruel treatment is fully allowed by the law. I'm sure everyone in this chamber has heard about battery cages and sow stalls. They may also be familiar with sheep being cooked alive on ships in the live export trade. They may be less familiar, though, with day-old chicks being ground up alive in macerators because as males they can't lay eggs, or pigs experiencing the prolonged terror of a convulsive, lung-burning suffocation in gas chambers. All of these things legislated as humane slaughter. Were it not for activists working undercover, the general public would not know anything about them. Industries did not kindly decide to open their doors and show their processes to the public. They became public knowledge only because activists exposed them. And rightly, we were all appalled. We were all appalled because it is in our natural human inclination to be kind to animals and to disapprove of their suffering. This is not a new phenomenon or one unique to the cause of animal rights. Activism and undercover work has long been the trigger that causes social change, and the political and legislative work that then cements those changes. Whistleblowers have revealed abuses of old people in aged care, illegal activity in the banking industry. Investigators have discovered donations sought from the NRA, revealed government corruption, unsafe work practices and exposed unethical corporate practices. The work of activists has reformed industries. So where do we draw the line at hindering these activities? Animal activists do not wish to break laws, but the current way we treat animals compels them to. Activists are working to expose legislated violence and have no intention to scare, intimidate or harass farmers or their families. In fact, they have no interest in going anywhere near their homes. Undercover work is always done with the intention to reveal the legal and routine practices in animal agriculture so the public can be informed. Industries that rely on animals have, up until this point, been able to operate with little to no public scrutiny. CCTV cameras have still not been installed on factory farms and slaughterhouses in Victoria, as has been done in France, England and Scotland. The stakeholders in this motion are the public. They want to know how animals are treated, and they have a right to. If I were to treat my cats and dogs at home the way that farm animals are treated, it would be illegal. This contradiction in the law is very odd and quite irrational. If a practice is painful and cruel for one animal, so much so that it carries significant criminal penalties, how can it possibly be legal for another animal who will also be subjected to pain and suffering? The community's disapproval to cruelty to animals is, quite logically, not conditional on where it takes place or what species that animal is. And there is no other way to discover the reality of this without the work of activists. Support for this motion will concern and deter all whistleblowers, no matter the context. This would have broad implications. On privacy and trespass, the motion talks about trespass. Trespass by non-violent concerned citizens armed with nothing more than cameras. But it doesn't mention trespass on private land by armed shooters most days during duck season. The terror of innocent citizens being shot at or inadvertently hit by shotgun pellets is something constituents regularly contact me about. But unsurprisingly, the Nationals aren't concerned about that. The motion talks about privacy. I want to make something very clear here. No houses have ever been entered by activists, ever. And as far as I'm aware, farmers and their families do not live inside the disgusting sheds among the filth and disease that they force upon battery hens. Neither are there children running around playing on the kill floors of abattoirs. To suggest that farmers have been subject to invasion of their personal homes is blatantly untrue and seeks to deliberately mislead the public. Why is there a supposition of privacy for industries that are cruel? Perhaps because our opponents know that what Paul McCartney said is true. And I quote, "If slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian," unquote. It is also important to note that there are no incidents of animal rights activists physically harming farmers. However, the opposite is true. It's often female activists, of which there are many, who suffer the worst backlash. The sexism and misogyny that comes from the mouths of the supporters of these industries is reprehensible. I apologise for some of the language as I read verbatim from some social media posts. I would have your head and it would be on a stick by now. I can't wait until someone kicks your teeth out of your mouth. Trust me, it's going to happen. I pray someone punches you hard in the throat so that you choke to death. I'll pull your fingernails out with a pair of pliers the next time I see you. Trust me when I say your life isn't safe. You'll cross the wrong farmer one day, and when you do, I hope and wish and pray he shoots you square in the eyes. If I had my way with you, I'd throw your trashy body onto the train tracks. These are just some of the threats sent to one single female activist that I know. Further, her home address and number plate was posted into a private men's Facebook group with over 50,000 members. The caption, the headline of this group, "First to rape the bitch wins." Where is the privacy issue here? Terrorism has been bandied about. While Ms Bard didn't say these things herself, and others like her have incited it. Every time they call an animal activist a terrorist, as indeed we have seen on your social media posts, Ms Barth. How out of touch can you be? While the world is still reeling from Christchurch, from Sri Lanka, from the atrocities committed in the name of true terror, they have the audacity to compare these acts to people who non-violently protest the abuse of animals. I want to take this moment to personally apologise to all the real victims of terrorism, the people who have lost their families, their lives, their homes in violent and sadistic ways. I am sorry that there are people in this place who will use your grief as a buzzword in a desperate attempt to find relevance in a voting community that no longer wants or needs them. I have pleaded that parliamentarians refrain from divisive and hateful speech towards members of our community simply for having different beliefs. But regardless, they continue to find scapegoats and threats in order to foster fear and division. An electoral strategy that, if not discredited entirely by their demolition in last year's state election, seems to be getting another go round in this parliament. On biosecurity, there are no incidences, not one, of animal activists causing biosecurity problems in Australia. There are, however, many incidences of disease outbreaks caused by intensive animal agriculture. For example, bird flu, which emerged in young in New South Wales just a few years ago, the result of free-range hens contracting bird flu from wild ducks, which was then spread to battery-caged hens. Hundreds of thousands of animals were then killed in order to contain the disease. Unfortunately, it then spread to a second farm in Young, and the animals on that farm were also killed. These places are often plagued by rats and mice, cockroaches, mosquitoes, flies, maggots, birds and every other disease vector imaginable. Feral cats will feed on mice and rotting animals inside one farm and then travel to another. Believe me, they have plenty of problems with biosecurity. None of them are related to activists and whistleblowers. The next zoonotic disease outbreak, which may kill millions, will almost certainly come from intensive animal agriculture, just as in the past so many of the human-killing disease outbreaks have emerged from that area. On antimicrobial resistance, in order to fight disease in these dirty places, they rely heavily on the extensive use of antibiotics. More antibiotics are used and misused in animal agriculture than are ever administered to human beings. This can and is resulting in antibiotic resistance in humans and antibiotic resistance bacteria, the so-called superbugs. These reduce the effectiveness of antibiotics in treating diseases in all animals, human and non-human alike. Without serious caution, we could be plunged back into the dark ages of medicine when anybody could die of a simple infection. Indeed, the World Health Organization has a global action plan on antimicrobial resistance. Australia published its own response to the global plan in 2015, titled Australia's First National Antimicrobial Resistance Strategy 2015-19. Nowhere in its 37 pages does it identify animal activists or whistleblowers as a threat. With both biosecurity and antimicrobial resistance, it is intensive animal agriculture that is the problem. What this really shows is that the opposition are not interested in protecting the health of the animals or of people. They are confecting a story about biosecurity to try and make illegal the actions of whistleblowers who show the extreme animal cruelty that occurs on the factory farms. If the Nationals don't want whistleblowers exposing farmers for animal cruelty, perhaps they could support laws that prevent animal cruelty. Just like this Parliament is broadcast at all times when it is open, so should these places where animals are abused. The suffering in here is never going to be as great as that in factory farms, notwithstanding some of the speeches I have had to sit through in the past few months. As it stands now, the only way that consumers can know the conditions under which animals are raised and slaughtered is through the footage obtained by these brave whistleblowers. For example, the excruciating gas chambers used in all major pig slaughterhouses. World-leading, very humane. The pigs just gently fall asleep, we've been told. That was before extensive footage was obtained by activists. Footage of pigs entering gas chambers, thrashing around in ever-increasing panic and agony as their lungs are seared from the inside out. Desperate to escape, many of whom inadvertently pull their own legs off, fighting for their lives. This was the work of whistleblowers, exposing the fallacy of humane slaughter. The routine use of live animals as bait in the greyhound racing industry, leading to numerous prosecutions, a ban on the sport in our nation's capital, and a damning independent review of the industry, all resulting from the hard work of activists who risked their lives and their freedom to install hidden cameras. We only know that male chicks in the egg industry are macerated alive because we've seen the film, taken just outside Bendigo, captured by brave activists. They are literally dumped into a grinder the day they are born. The baby chicks try to fly up and away from the grinder, but as newborns, their attempts are fruitless. We only know of the slaughter, sometimes by sledgehammer, of 5-day-old male calves for the crime of not producing milk in the dairy industry through the work of undercover activists. Much of this is shown in the documentary Dominion, a screening of which is being organised for all members of Parliament. We especially welcome the one National in this chamber, the member for Eastern Victoria, to come along to this screening. And if this motion should pass, I will be insisting the committee watches it too. I'm sure afterwards you will agree with me that we should protect animals from cruelty and prosecute perpetrators rather than going after those that expose that cruelty. On human health and workers, I want to turn now to the plight of Victorian workers in these places that you seem so keen to prevent the public from seeing. We depend upon the work of activists to let us know what happens in sheds that are kept far from human purview. The footage obtained by them shows us that the harms of the animal agriculture industries are also inflicted on humans. I raise this aspect because farms and slaughterhouses are intrinsically related. Slaughtering and processing animals is inherently physically hard and dangerous industry where company profits consistently take priority over workers' most basic rights. In their endless goal of higher volume and greater efficiency, these corporations knowingly jeopardise workers' safety every day. That isn't just coming from animal rights activists, it's coming from our trade unions too. Reading from the Australian Meat Industry Employees Union submission to the Productivity Commission, quote, "Workers use sharp hooks and knives while standing on floors made slippery from blood, fat, faecal matter and other bodily fluids. Unpredictable and violent reactions from animals before slaughter pose constant physical threats to workers. Heavy suspended carcasses of beef travelling on a fast-moving automated line can slam a worker to the floor. Down the line, processing workers stand for long periods of time, working closely together while making thousands of repetitive cuts each shift. The noise is deafening and temperatures in the plants range from hot and humid on the killing floors to near freezing in the processing rooms. Pathogens can infect the workers and chemicals from decomposing animal waste, disinfectants or gases such as ammonia used for refrigeration can prove deadly," end quote. I've been a proud unionist all my working life, and I understand how important a good workplace is on the health of its employees. Abattoirs have a higher prevalence of self-reported poor psychological and physical health than any other workplace. Workers' compensation claims in the meat industry are approximately 3 times higher than average, and the frequency and severity of injuries is reflected in an industry premium rate of 4 times the average. A slew of injuries are visited upon these workers, some of them unique to these places. Chronic diseases include Q fever from goats and hydatid disease from cows. Workers become infected with Salmonella, E. coli and hepatitis E, among hundreds of others, not to mention the regular amounts of burns, crushes, grinds, cuts, electrocutions and amputations. The National Union of Workers website talking about Baiada Poultry says, "Many wouldn't believe the truth about the working conditions at Baiada's poultry factory in Melbourne's West because the stories from members are shocking. Bullying at Baiada was rife. Favouritism, bribery, verbal abuse and even reports of violent and sexual abuse started to paint a very frightening picture. Hundreds of workers were working cash in hand for $10 an hour and the health and safety on the site was terrible." In 2010, Surel Singh, a contract cleaner at Baiada, was decapitated after he was ordered to clean a chicken line running at full capacity. He had already finished his shift, but workers say that when he asked if he could go home, he was told he could go home, but not to bother coming back the next day. Workers were given no counselling and sent back to work within a couple of hours after the line had been cleaned of the blood of Surel Singh. End quote. And this has not even touched on one of the greatest risks to our society at large, the impact on workers who must suppress their empathy in order to kill as a matter of routine. Committing systematic acts of violence is widely documented as predisposing workers to alcoholism and drug addiction as ways of combating the stress of the job. None of this would be known were it not for the work of activists gathering undercover footage to show what happens to humans and non-humans alike. A colleague of mine reported that in watching Dominion, it was the impact such work had on our men and boys that struck her the most. They are paid to do such brutal acts every day, she said. What do they do with that internalised trauma? Any industry that involves killing and the potential for extreme suffering should surely be subject to some scrutiny. Yet the animal agriculture industries hide behind these practices, behind fences and within sheds, but even more behind legislation, regulations and codes that are blatantly insufficient. They hide behind marketing buzzwords that have lost all meaning: humanely slaughtered, ethically raised, free range, intended only to capitalise on the Australian public's love of animals. They also hide behind legislators that increasingly seek to punish whistleblowers and rescuers while protecting those who benefit financially from this systematic cruelty. When killing animals has largely become the responsibility of a small group of people under great strain, we need to find solutions for animals and ourselves. I want to take a moment to reflect on how we've gotten here today, debating this motion. Coming from the one National in this chamber, none of us should be surprised. When he was Minister for Agriculture under the coalition government, the National in the other place, Peter Walsh, fought to keep killing dogs by blunt force trauma during their Code of Practice review. He fought to keep it. He claimed it was a humane way of killing a dog, as long as it wasn't done in front of the other dogs. Thank you so much. He only backflipped due to public backlash, but his position is well and truly on the record. This same man from the National Party also changed the Code of Practice at the 11th hour, right before it was finalised, to remove vet checks for dogs. It was only when the Honourable Jaala Pulford became Minister for Agriculture under the Andrews Labor government that they were reinstated. I'm talking about the laws and codes that govern puppy factories here, an issue that everyone agrees is cruel. Everyone except the Nats. There is no level of animal cruelty that they won't defend. Speaking of puppy farms, in 2017, the Andrews Labor government banned them, a decision welcomed by myself and my party, a decision that was well overdue. But they came to this decision due to the overwhelming evidence of cruelty on puppy farms. In fact, the first ever puppy farm to be exposed was owned by a then sitting Member of Parliament.
Order. Take a seat, please. Sit down. Thank you. Ms. Bass, on a point of order.
Thank you, Acting President. Acting President, this motion relates to farming practices, commercial farms and the like. It has absolutely nothing to do with puppy farms, and I ask that you draw the member back to the topic, which is this particular motion.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Mr. Medic, can you please back to the motion? Thank you.
I am, thank you, sir. Mr. Acting President, and I state it because it does have relevance. We're talking here, the motion just does not talk about animal agriculture. It talks about whistleblowers and this is what we're talking about here. And the fact that that was then owned by Mr. Ron Wells. How do they think that cruelty was documented? In fact, it was by animal activists. How telling this motion is about Victorian farms. There is the relevance about Victorian farms. Yet the core and heart of these farms, the animals, don't even get a mention in this motion. The animals remain an invisible commodity, even to people in this chamber. I'm here to make sure they don't stay invisible and unrepresented when they are the most important stakeholder in the debate. The Nats were reportedly upset when recently an animal activist was given a $1 fine mentioned by Ms Bath in her comments. To farm animals in Victoria, you can cut off their tails, skin, teeth and testicles without anaesthetic, throw them in an industrial mincer alive or asphyxiate them with painful CO2 gas. You won't even be given a fine for this, not even $1. Yet Ms Bath's motion mentions supposed stringent animal welfare laws. Hell, the industry's own very codes of conduct of practice are not only voluntary. Let me stress that word, those codes are voluntary. I learned recently that Nats Peter Walsh, the MP charged with animal welfare in his portfolio, was unaware that the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1986 does not apply to animals who are killed for consumption, found easily on page 6. I wonder if he is also unaware that when someone commits an act against the Protection of Cruelty to Animals Act, it is a defence to that offence if that animal is being killed for consumption, found on page 5 of the Livestock Management Act 2010. Laws are designed to reflect and uphold the values of a society. They are clearly failing to do so, and you'd be forgiven for thinking the Shadow Minister for Agriculture would actually know the legislation relevant to his portfolio. Cruelty to animals is legal and hidden, and the only way we know about it is the work of those willing to take the risk in exposing it. Many of these brave people have been recognised for their commitment to exposing the truth. Lynn White from Animals Australia received an Order of Australia medal for her tireless work exposing the cruelty in the live export trade. Another activist who exposed live baiting in the greyhound industry was nominated for the Pride of Australia Award. Under Ms Barr's motion, Lynn White and others would not be recognised, but rather jailed or fined for exposing cruelty and corruption. And it needs to be said that this is the thin end of the wedge. If we allow this motion to proceed, where will it stop? I want to conclude my remarks by talking about the motivations of these activists and whistleblowers. While I can't speak for all of them, I can imagine they see the world in a similar way to myself. And if they do, they see animals as individuals who have personalities and subjective experiences of their own lives rather than as identical units of production. That they are exploited and abused by powerful forces beyond their control does not discount this truth, it only magnifies the tragedy. My brothers and sisters with different skins are calling out for our help. They yearn for freedom from oppression, from imprisonment, exploitation, torture and death in industrial-scale factory farms. I will be voting against this motion because it is seeking to introduce ag-gag laws into Victoria by stealth. I'm voting against this motion because it is a part of a big lie that animal protection is guaranteed by our laws when we know that it is not. I'm voting against this motion because it invokes biosecurity as a reason to attack activists, whereas we know this is not a real threat but a confected one. I'm voting against this motion because it seeks to criminalise activists and whistleblowers acting on their moral compass to help others from violence while protecting the perpetrators of that violence. I'm voting against this motion because it could have a chilling effect on the activities of whistleblowers and protesters of all kinds. And while my Conservative colleagues will want to maintain the status quo and stop all change, I believe in progress to a better world for all. And I know that protesting and exposing oppression across society is part of what drives and allows that process. I'm voting against this motion because while I'm seeking positive ways forward for the government to support farmers' prosperity in my region, the National in this chamber has run out of ideas and seeks to defend the indefensible and puts animals and rural people last. They or their predecessor parties have argued against better animal welfare in this place for 105 years, but now the animals will have their own representative and it will not go unchallenged. Animal activists seek to open our eyes to the cruelty and oppression in our current system and yearn for a better world where there is less violence and brutality against anyone, no matter what the skin they're born in. And I also yearn for that world. Thank you.